Board of Education Committee of the Whole meeting for Thursday, September 23rd, 2021. The Board of Education makes available at least one current copy of the Open Meetings Act, which is posted on the west wall of the meeting room and accessible to members of the public. Do I have a motion to approve the agenda?
I move that the Board of Education of District 15 approve the agenda as presented.
Second?
Second.
Your votes, please. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Thank you. First up on the agenda is a policy article update, and the speaker for that particular issue is Mr. Alexander.
All right, so yes, to continue along with our policy update structure, we've prepared two additional articles tonight, the 6,000 and 7,000 articles. Before we get to those, we've been through Articles 1 and 2 in the Committee of the Whole meeting. We addressed kind of all the concerns with those in the board meeting after we had had discussion. So at this point, the next step for Articles 1 and 2 would be to formally approve those first reading at the next board meeting. So unless there's any questions, that's all I really had to say about those two articles tonight. It's just to lay out that time frame and see if we're okay and good to go.
Okay.
All right. Then we will dive into the 6,000 article series, which is the most complicated of the two this evening. So we'll begin with the hard and end with the easy, and it's not really even that hard. The plan that I have for you tonight, I hope will expedite the process of reviewing them a little bit, and then you can review the ones that don't really have much change or impact. They're basically the same thing as they have been on your own, and then we'll come back to the board meeting and talk about those. So just as a reminder, on the table of contents, you see some green there, and that green text indicates the current Beatrice policies being incorporated into the Prairie table of contents and numbering system. So there's some of those green policies that I will touch on, and some of them that don't really require anything to be said, because they're policies that we're just bringing over. So, but everything again transitions into a Prairie policy number for the purpose of updates in the future. When we get policy updates, we'll just be able to swap those in, approve them, swap them in, and eliminate the old policies as we move forward. So the very first one, as we move through the 6,000 policies, just to talk about 6,005 policy that deals with the school calendar and Workday. That's an original BPS policy outlining calendar expectations that the district had in place. So we just completely pulled that one over and brought it in and labeled it 6,005. The next one, 6,010, the highlighted sections, numbers 5 and 6, this policy deals with the needs of all who are legally eligible to attend the school district and who can attend. And it also deals a little bit with grade levels and so forth. But basically, the highlighted sections 5 and 6 were in the old policy that Beatrice had in place. The Perry policy comes with items 1 through 4, and at some point in the past, the Beatrice Public Schools added sections 5 and 6. And so with 5 and 6, basically what it talks about is, to the extent possible, practice for, travel to, and participation in activities sponsored by the NSAA shall be scheduled outside of the regular 1,032 and the 1,080-hour standard. And those are required hours to meet NE accreditation. And so number 5, and that's basically what number 5 is about. And it's just about eliminating the amount of time that kids are taken out of school for activities that are NSA sponsored. We try to accommodate that as much as possible, but especially when it comes to tournament times, it's not as easy as we would like it to be, because a lot of those schedules are set up obviously by the NSAA. So number 6 just references keeping a sensible balance between the time spent on academics and the time spent on extracurricular activities. So in the past, somewhere along the lines, those two paragraphs have been written into BPS policy which is originally Perry policy as well, but it became important to have those two. So, questions?
I don't get why number 6 is in there, but it's okay. I mean, it just seems, I don't know. I mean, it's just not, it's not a rule, it's nothing we follow, it's, I mean, it doesn't give us specific guidance to do anything, it's just a nice little statement.
Yeah.
I'm assuming that at one point there was some question about that, spending more time on one or the other. And when I say
There's
one or
still
the
that-
other, I would say that, there was a question, are we spending more time on extracurricular than we are on academic?
Well, there's still that question.
Yeah.
This does not address it or answer it or do anything. It's just like somebody had a
Yes.
thought and they put it in a policy handbook.
Yeah,
Yeah, I'm guessing at some point there was controversy about how much time is being spent in a particular activity, and so it was placed in there to somewhat appease or address that concern. But you're right, it doesn't, I mean, we do, I will tell you that especially with, there are certain activities that because of the nature of the activity, they take a full day to participate in. Probably one of the largest time consumers of student instructional time is golf, because you just have to spend a whole day at the golf course playing golf in order to get it in.
And
So-
they will not put them on the weekends.
No,
That's the problem.
yeah,
Well, from a school perspective, it would be way,
easier.
make more sense if they would play the golf on Saturday, which is not gonna happen, but.
Right.
But I also wonder about, why is that sentence about individual absence, why is that in the same policy as this activities rule? That I think is odd. All of a sudden, it's like absences because of illness or family-centered activities, which have nothing to do with activities.
I'm assuming just to create that separation, just like you said, they have nothing there, so they're, I mean, I think
That
that it's
seems,
probably
would be
there.
two different things, but.
Yeah, I would agree.
I just noticed that 1 and 2 need to be corrected. 1 says K through 6, that's not what we do. So those will be,
Yep, you're
Yeah.
right, should say 5th grade.
and then the next should be 6 through, okay. So we'll have to make those changes,
Oh, yeah.
but that's incorrect.
Yep. So we'll make those corrections in the next,
Okay.
present that policy.
Good catch.
All right, the next policy, doesn't really have any highlighting, but it's 6015. The only reason that I point that out to you is because that's the organizational structure at Beatrice Public Schools currently. This is a BPS specific policy that comes over. The only reason I think it's important to make note of right now is that's currently our organizational structure of grade levels. However, one of the things that we will probably ask ourselves in this building process that we're going through in reference to this policy is, are we going to stick to that programmatic structure of delivery as we make this building, or build this building? So, for instance, I mean, will we look at a different, will it be a PK 2 and a 3-5, or will it be a PK 2, 3-5, or will it be a PK 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and is there any discussion about 6th grade being part of this building as well? I mean, I'm just throwing this out there, not that we're even in that part of the discussion yet, but this policy 6015 is an original Beatrice Public Schools policy, so as we go through that process, we want to know that we have to look at this policy if we change it. Okay? Jumping down to 6110, that's the next one. I have this one in there just because it outlines the state requirements for instructional time at the different grade levels. And then 6112 adds language of the assistant superintendent being able to call off school in the event of an emergency. And we just did that because of the fact that if I'm gone for whatever reason, then obviously Dr. Nielsen would have the ability to do that, so we just put that language in there. So not a big change.
Can I ask, these schools that are needing to cancel because of lack of substitutes, are they gonna have to make up those days, or is that gonna be considered an emergency?
There's a waiver process.
Or can they learn at home because they're using computers?
Yeah, and some of those schools are doing remote learning. I know that yesterday at the school law workshop, we heard of 2 schools out west that have called on school. And they are accessing everything in remote learning. So those hours would still count, but if they called off school and didn't have remote learning as an option, then there is a waiver process that's available. So. 6116 is the next one that has changes to it. And basically, again, it just references the assistant superintendent in order to be able to have emergency dismissal or cancellation. So both of those policies reflect reasons why that's important to have. 6120 has an entire section of it that has yellow in it. This one's important for us to talk about because in our safe schools policy, we state that representatives of faculty, parents, and the community will be part of the committee to meet at least annually to prepare and or review safety and security plans and procedures, including emergency plans and procedures. So the way this currently works is that we do have Chief Lang is the main safety and security officer that does the inspections of the buildings and meets with the safety and security team. And then he does the review, and then we organize a day where we have the administrative team present. We go through all of that, and we also try to include parents that are available on that day to be part of that committee. So, but it doesn't always happen that parents get involved with that, and it's not necessarily anybody's fault, but sometimes it's hard to find people to break away during the day to be able to do that. So I just bring that to your attention, that how our safety and security team operates now is we have the inspection, and then we get together to review the inspection and make plans moving forward. Sometimes those plans change depending on what the plan writes up, and sometimes they don't. 6200, all language from the previous DPS policy is highlighted in yellow. So this reflects objectives and talks about the Board of Education and employees of the school district are responsible for maintaining the program of instruction in accordance with the provisions of the Constitution of the state, the acts of the legislature, and the rules and regulations of the State Board of Education, the policies and regulations of the Board of Education. So ultimately, what this policy is about, it's all about the objectives of the school district, and predominantly everything below the yellow was already matching policy with the Perry policy. The yellow section is just what was different in accordance to the address. So we pulled that over and slapped it into this policy to reflect that local flavor. 6210 talks about curriculum development and adoption. And basically, we just put in the additional having the assistant superintendent be part of that process, and any curriculum or development must go through, be rejected or revised and approved by the assistant superintendent before being submitted to the Board of Education for final approval. So just following that chain of command. 6210, basically, that entire policy is former Beatrice Public Schools policy pulled it over, put it into a number, and we gave, the assistant superintendent and the title in there, and then that administrative regulation on the backside is how we go through the process of curriculum review. So that's the administrative regulation that goes with 62. That administrative regulation, that full yellow policy wouldn't normally be part of the policy that Perry would provide, because that's a school-based decision. So we just took the same thing and brought it over. Moving forward, we jump all the way to 6260. That's the next policy that has any type of change to it. And that, the only reason that change is there, that's highlighted, is that's our previous 62 or 6510 policy that talks about our guidance program. So it's exactly the same policy that we've had, just with a numerical change. Those are guidance. 6270, the entire, typically when it would come to field trips, the Perry policy would provide what's in white, and then everything below that is pulled over from our previous 6315 policy outlining field trips. So all of that language comes directly over from previous Beatrice Public Schools policy. 6270 is the administrative regulation. The regulation part is all Beatrice Public Schools regulation of how, the outline for how field trips are supposed to be organized, handled. Policy 6280. This policy is the exact same policy as we previously operated off of. The activity dismissal we updated in 2019, and we created the outline of state qualifying activities, teams, and individuals, and how we make determinations as to how school will be let out or not let out. And that was determined to be a decision made by the superintendent or assistant superintendent of the school in conjunction with the athletic director and coaches or activity sponsors related to that, whatever program is in the state. So we pulled that over. The next set of policies that have any type of change in the 6,000s is 6,300. So we jump through. A lot of this policy section also includes the return to learn requirements that we have for concussion or cancer that are legislative requirements to have in policy. And on 6,300, this is the selection or review of instructional and media materials, and outlines the policy for how materials are selected and whose assignment that is and responsibility. Basically, it's the same policy that we've had, but the administrative regulation, it's important to know, again, policy does not come with administrative regulation. So the administrative regulation that's in yellow is strictly related to, it's our previous policy that we had before, and how to request reconsideration of media if there is such. So if a person in the community does not like a certain media type or something that is being used, the form for them to request review and reconsideration of that media material is provided. (6301) outlines the process for selection, paying for equipment, textbooks, books, and regulation, and how we regulate all that. And it also has an administrative regulation with it as well. And then 6310, I just have as a note, that outlines the textbook loan policy. It's the same policy that we previously had. But very few people understand that when you have private schools in your district, there's a rule for the Department of Education that outlines the requirements for lending textbooks to those private schools, and so that policy is in there. I just wanted to highlight that as a note. And then that takes us clear to 63, 65, before we see any other yellow. And character education policy, again, this is just the previous Beatrice Public Schools policy. And we pulled it all the way over, outlining the emphasis of character education. And that's requirement by legal reference 79725. And then 6366 outlines citizenship. The policy relating to how schools teach citizenship, and that's all outlined in state statute 79724. And that's our previous Beatrice Public Schools policy. Outside of that, everything else pretty much matches up policy for policy with Perry Law Firm. The only thing that changes is we put them all in the 6,000 article section where they all belong. And we have the 6,000 article ready to go. So like Doris said, reading material for you tonight. If you have questions about a specific policy, again, don't be afraid to email. That was a difficult one. So that takes us to the 7,000 policies. And this one you'll love because it's all about construction. And this policy is a section of policies we've never had before. We've had parts of these policies in the 3,000 article, but because of changes in construction law and state statute in the past number of years, the proposal from Perry Law Firm is to have your own section or article on construction law. And so basically they've provided all of the policies for us to have our own section, which comes at a timely, very timely period for us. And basically the only one that we pull over information from is policy number 7050, which is all required by state law, but we had that in a previous Beatrice Public Schools policy, so we pulled it over in policy 7050. And then, policy 7060. Oh, that was all my previous policy. The very same policies as 3535 that we used to have in the 2000 sections. Basically, we pull those two policies out of the previous section, put them in the 7,000s, and now we've got our own article on construction ready to go.
Excellent.
Hopefully by Christmas time, we will have, I don't know, Christmas might be a little aggressive, but we'll have all the policies gone through and updated and ready rescind, well, we'll start rescinding in the next board meeting, 1 and 2. We'll make a motion to rescind Articles 1 and 2, adopt the proposed 1 and 2, and then we'll just keep moving.
I don't know, watching Christmas movies, doing policy updates, I don't know.
Depends on the Christmas movie, I guess.
Yeah. Okay?
Did we get through all that? Now we're buzzing right into superintendent update.
We are.
Okay, Mr. Alexander's going to do that also.
Cooking right along. So the NASB area meeting, October 6th, which I believe, if I'm not mistaken, is like next Wednesday, right?
No, 2 weeks.
2
Yeah,
weeks.
2 weeks. That's next.
Okay. Yeah, next week is the end of September, and then the following week, we go to Nebraska City for the NASB meeting. Our plan will be to meet here at the school, and we'll have transportation lined up to drive to Nebraska City together. So we'll just get all that figured out in the next week and let you know in an email what time that's gonna take place. Community meetings and facility update. So where we're at, we're kind of right now just in that, holding in that conversation pattern. We had our last community meeting update last night, where we tried to blanket the entire community with the last chance to come out and listen to the presentation, ask questions, get any of their questions answered, and we had 5 people there. So it wasn't a large turnout. Nonetheless, we gave the presentation to the 5 people. We had some good questions afterwards that really revolved around some of the same questions we've had. So I think we're ready now to put that frequently asked questions document up there. The one thing that I fear about the FAQ is that it's going to reference the lease purchase, which we know as a board that is an option for us, but it may not be the option we choose to go with. Because a lot of that depends on conversations that we're still waiting on to hear from. So when we get through those conversations, which at this point looks like we'll have clarity on about October 5th or 6th, then we'll know where we're at in terms of being ready to move forward in the whole building project that we're working on. So I apologize that it's not moving faster, but when you have to wait on other conversations to be held, that's just where we're at. The most common questions that we've been asked about have been traffic and busing, the old buildings and what we're going to do with them, the neighborhood schools, what's it mean for staffing, and the next steps. Those have probably been the top 5 questions that we've been asked. And so taking a couple of those questions and transitioning into item 4.3 traffic study, I did meet with Tobias Templemeyer and city engineer James Burrow last week, and just to update them on where we're at and what we're looking at. And they recommended that we do another traffic study. There was one done in 2017, but the scope of that was for a 200 student preschool. And so knowing that we're looking at 1,000 student PK5, it makes the most sense to go ahead and do another traffic study to talk about what's all going to change out there once it's ready to go.
Can you do a traffic study if you don't know how many entrances and that kind of thing?
Well, from that traffic study there will be recommendations made as to that.
Okay.
Yep.
All right.
So that will help us determine, based on the traffic load, how many entrances and how many exits we know or we can plan on needing for that many people. One of the other things that came out of that discussion is the idea of a roundabout up at the north end where 33rd and Lincoln come together right at the BSDC turn, is to put a roundabout in there that would create a slight bit of, it would create a slowdown, and it would also help with the traffic flow in terms of a little bit of hesitation for drop off and pickup. That would help with that entire process. The other discussion is about the need for a stoplight, and right now, we won't know until they do that traffic study.
Was there any discussion about possibly having BSDC traffic diverted to Hoyt Street?
They know that that's a possibility.
Probably require Hoyt Street to be widened and some improvements made there in order to do that, but I know that we had talked about that at one time, because I think their shift gets off at 3 o'clock, which is very close to when our students would be letting out, or getting out of school, so that seemed to be logical to me at that time.
Yeah. One of the other conversations that we had was about the county ARA funds, or ESSER's funds, which basically can be utilized if they are lent to another organization, another entity that is looking at some sort of project. So there may be discussion along those lines.
But is 33rd a county street?
I think it is.
See, I wondered after they annexed in the cemetery, got all that valuation, whether that became a city street at that point.
James had indicated that part of that road structure out there was still part of the county's. So we'll have to look further into that as we move forward. But I think for now, so you can all rest assured, if you're asked by the community members, there is plans for a traffic study in the making. And I did talk to JEO, and they are sending a proposal to do that traffic study. The other major organization that does those is Olson and Associates. And I've got a phone call into them, but I haven't heard back yet, so.
Do you know, and I'm thinking when we did that other traffic study, that was prior to the trail going through there, and that they would have been able to exit west also, and I don't know if that is taken off the table then.
Yeah.
Because I don't think that they probably want people regularly driving over the trail,
Right.
even though, we do downtown and stuff, but that's a little bit different
Yeah.
scenario.
Yeah, I would agree.
And how much traffic would come in through those neighborhoods.
And those streets and that trail will be a nice avenue for people that live in those neighborhoods to access the school. That will take a little pressure off the streets that are out there, so. But I would agree with you, I don't think that they'll probably want to drive across those. So hopefully the traffic study will lead us to know exactly what we're looking at in terms of the need for turning lanes and widening and street light or traffic lights and possible roundabouts and whatever the case may be. I still think that at the end of the day, we're gonna be in much better shape with the amount of room we have out there than what we currently have at our elementary schools that are boxed in pretty tight, especially at a couple of locations. So I think we're gonna have a lot more opportunity to eliminate some of the traffic flow or traffic headaches that we currently have. So. The old buildings, I've been working with Trevor Lee, and we have a meeting scheduled with, I think, 3 or 4 contractors and 2 or 3 developers in the area to discuss those old buildings, and take a look at what possibilities are out there for us. So that meeting, I think, is set for September 29th, and we'll have, I'm not sure who all the contractors are. Trevor's kind of been in charge of contacting them, and also a couple of developers that have looked into housing projects in Beatrice.
I'm getting a condo in my own classroom. I think it would be wonderful. I always wanted to live downtown and to be able to live in your own classroom. How cool would that be?
There you go. You never know. So outside of that, that's kind of an update on where we're at with all of those things, and it includes the traffic study. Next steps, obviously, like I said, in terms of when conversations have had a chance to work their way completely through about October 5th or 6th, then we'll know for sure, and we'll be able to hopefully dive into more detail about financial plan, preparation of the financial plan put in front of you as a board to make a decision on moving forward. That's all I have.
Next is the superintendent evaluation.
It's that time again, so, I heard back from Aaron, thanks for the reply. No one seems to have any problems with last year's, so we're gonna go ahead and continue on unless anybody has anything now that they wanna change.
I think it would be good for us to stick with the same thing for a couple of times, just to see, otherwise it's really difficult to compare.
Yeah, and the only changes I had thought about was if there was any questions that you felt should be removed or anything like that. But after a second time, then we'll have a better idea if that really doesn't fit. There's a couple that the president of the board might know, but otherwise, who knows if Jason is actually doing his things that he's supposed to do. As far as going to meetings or certain meetings or learning things.
He goes to lots of meetings.
He does, so
I see his
if they're the right
body
learning
language.
ones. So that one we might look at next year,
Okay.
because I had a lot of comments last year of, how would we know? And that was really about the only one that was there. I think there was one other, but we'll get a better feel for it. So as you're going through it, if you find one you don't like, write it down and give it back to me, and then I'll make sure I pass it on to Enhanced you. They can tweak that, or we can change it, so.
Yeah, they can work on that evaluation of the new one.
But otherwise, they're gonna do just like last year. They will set up a time for you to go in on the computer. And we're gonna get started this coming month. That way they can get everything put together and get it back to us, so by December, we can approve it and move on.
We aren't gonna have anything to do next year where policies will be done by December, the evaluation will be done. We'll be done with everything.
One of the reasons I like getting that evaluation done by December is we have to know by the December meeting whether or not he's not coming back. So, if we don't do anything, and if we don't know anything about his evaluation, then he just automatically rolls over. So, so it's always good to have the evaluation done so we know if there was a bad issue or something to take care of, so.
I have complete faith, Janet, that he will come up with something for us
For
to
you to do.
Due in January?
I have faith.
Well, something to look forward to.
Stay tuned.
Stay tuned.
In terms of the meetings, I will tell you this, whether or not I'm going, they're much easier to go to this year than they were last year.
You can do it from home. And that's it for me.
Since there is no public here, I do not think we'll need to take time for public questions and comments. So, do I have a motion to adjourn?
I move that the Board of Education of District 15 adjourn.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
This meeting is adjourned.
Freezing, it's so